And we'll have a formal roll call.
Thank you. Commissioners Keller,
Here.
Kilborn,
Here.
Davis,
Here.
Jordan,
Here.
Bernie.
Here.
Everyone's here.
Item number 3 would be changes to the agenda.
Chair Keller, I'd like to pull item 6B from the agenda. Just not ready for that discussion at this time. We'll bring that back when we have more information.
Very good. Moving along to item number 4 is public comment for any member of the public that would like to address the commission about an item that is not on the agenda. I don't see any. We'll move on to the consent items, which would be the meeting minutes, the annual wastewater collection system report, and professional services contract for Cater valve replacement program. And let me note that in the minutes, we've got state 3 instead of stage 3 drought a couple times.
So, Chair, the updated agenda, there's 2 items. A is meeting minutes and B is professional service contract for Cater valve replacement project.
I move approval.
Second.
Okay.
I'll second.
That was Davis Bernie, I think. All in favor? Aye. Got to be quick. Item number 6 is administrative items, and A is stage 3 drought update. Mr. Hagmark.
Commissioner Keller, Chair Keller, sorry. Commissioners, Joshua Hagmark, Water Resources Manager, here to give another stage 3 drought update. We have a very busy agenda today. In fact, we have Tom Fayram from the County Water Agency here to speak on one of the items, but we'll get started here. Rainfall totals, we talked about community conservation efforts, our current water supply strategy, update on our recycled water status, and again, an update from Tom Fayram on Lake Cachuma and the County Water Agency's efforts, drought response capital project highlights, and then water conservation program, and then come back to the 2015 urban water management plan update. So, in essence, we've basically ended our rainy season. Gibraltar just over 50% of normal with 13 inches of rain. Lake Cachuma 60% of normal, and downtown Santa Barbara at 65%. Certainly not what we were hoping for or looking for to help us out this year. So planning again for continued drought conditions. This is the latest from the California Drought Monitor. As you can see, the extreme drought situation encompasses the Santa Barbara County. Seems to be almost the heart of this drought. There has been some reprieve in Northern California, which has kind of created a tale of 2 cities for the state, the haves and the have-nots. And we happen to be in the category of have-nots. And so, as I mentioned, we'll be continuing to plan for continued drought conditions. There's a silver lining to this drought. It's the conservation efforts of our community. We did have a change from the item in the agenda. The draft presentation or the draft Council Agenda report noted a 27% conservation. We went back and looked at that, and it's actually a 41% conservation. What kind of threw it off for the first time, we're starting to accumulate state water in Cachuma, and typically, and we'll see this in the manager's report, state water just passes through the lake, and so our accounting system didn't really have a storage of state water in there, and so it was assuming that all that state water got delivered. Once we went through and changed the calculations, the conservation for April was actually 41%, which is very significant and impressive at this point. That brings our cumulative average now to 35% since declaring a stage 3 back in May of 2015. Our water supply strategy, we are in year 5, and we have ample supplies to meet demands through this year. We are going, you can see here, we have the use of imported water and excess capacity from other agencies that we plan to use to make sure that we can deliver the water that this community needs. We will be utilizing our groundwater. We do have some remaining Kachuma water that we plan on exhausting by the end of this year and will help us get to the summer. And then we have recycled water. Looking out into 2017, conservation becomes just an absolute essential item in helping us to meet demands. Desal coming online in the fall is going to be essential as well. It's basically broken up the 10,000 acre feet of water that we need to get through the next year is basically broken up approximately 30% desal, 30% imported, 30% groundwater, and then the 10% being miscellaneous water from recycled and other sources. And we still have a planned shortage out in year 7, and we're continuing to focus on solutions to that. We see importing water as being a strong potential to meet that demand if we have continued drought conditions. So where did we end? We did get a final state water allocation of 60%, which is the best we've seen in many, many years. That is approximately 2,000 acre feet of water that we'll be receiving from that. We also completed the purchase of supplemental water from the Antelope Valley East Kern State District, and that's about 4,000 acre feet of water. This certainly helps extend our supplies through this continued drought. However, the challenges are now kind of focused on the limitations of conveyance, and that's going to be one of the focuses we're going to continue to discuss and watch closely. We are, as I mentioned, planning to use the capacity of other agencies, the unused capacity, and that will be coming up on a monthly basis as each agency is adjusting their deliveries to the lake, and so that's going to be a critical component for us. We have in the last 2 months been able to take advantage of some significant capacity left on the table by Montecito and Carpinteria, who have shifted their deliveries to later in the summer. That has helped us to kind of start stockpiling some state water in the lake to help us meet demands later in the summer. Kachuma storage as a buffer, that's just going to be a big part of this year, but even more significant next year. Being able to build up that reserve in the lake to help us meet those peak demands is going to be critical. We are looking at the chance that storage buffer could be completely depleted by fall and may require some short-term water use restrictions. We'll be watching that. Likely at this time, those restrictions wouldn't be needed until probably late August into September. But hopefully we're able to take advantage of the extra capacity. Conservation is more than 35%, then we should have adequate supplies to get us through that peak demand. As far as demand management goes, we do have rates, which we'll be talking about later in today's meeting, but those will be going into effect on July 1st. Cumulative average reduction is currently at 35%. And state regulations right now, we do not foresee additional statewide regulations this year. Staff continues to monitor it. It appears that the state is taking actions to pull back because half the state is out of the urgent drought measure, and so they're kind of putting it back into the hands of the agencies to determine what they need to do, which has been our direction this whole time. When our requirement was actually 12%, and we've been asking our community for 25% and now 35%. So city regulations, we do not anticipate the need for new regulations at this time due to consistent conservation achievements. However, there may be a need for short-term. We're thinking 6 to 12 weeks where regulations limiting water use during peak time. Right now, the triggers might be conservation falling below 35%, or reductions in imported water deliveries from what we've planned. Temporary regulations restricting water use could entail limitations on outdoor sprinkler use. That's kind of what we're focusing on, we need a certain amount of conservation, and I think as we get closer, we'll know more about how we get that little bit of conservation that we need. So basically not an outdoor watering moratorium, but a restriction on the use of sprinklers. People can hand water their lawns, and the use of drip will continue to be a viable option. This is what we're considering, and we'll be continuing to develop this and bring something back for further discussion. Recycled water status. So the latest, just recapping, the facility was designed to produce 2.5 MGD. It has yet to produce that. It has shown that it can sustainably produce 750,000 gallons a day. Recently, we've made some operational changes and continue to try and push this. We've brought on a consultant who specializes in filter operations, and they're assisting us now. But we've gotten the facility up to 1 MGD. Our goal is to get it up to at least 1.5 MGD. At 1.5 MGD, we feel like we can start to meet some of the peak demands that we're anticipating this summer. We are still planning to use the Valverde well, which produces about 0.2 MGD. So at this point, if we can't get up to that 1.5 MGD, we are anticipating a demand exceeding what non-potable water we have available. We are considering a 20 to 35% temporary voluntary reduction. This is similar to what we did last year. Of course, if we can avoid it, we'd like to, but given our potable water situation, we feel that putting any potable water into the system is not desirable or necessary. It shouldn't be necessary at this point for landscaping. And so we're going to continue to watch this. We feel like by mid-June, we should have an idea of whether we're going to be able to hit that 1.5 MGD or higher production. And so June should be a lively discussion about, hopefully we're going to have adequate water, but if not, we will be preparing to issue a request for voluntary reduction. Last year, just to note, recycled customers did achieve a 35% voluntary conservation, and if we can achieve that again this year, that would put us in a position where we'd be using minimal, if any, potable water in the system. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Tom Fairham, the Assistant Public Works Director for the county, to talk a little bit about the County Water Agency and its efforts and how they work with the Kachuma project and the member units.
Thanks for coming and informing us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. Again, my name is Tom Fairham. I'm with the County Public Works Department. And in my capacity, I oversee the County Water Agency and the County Flood Control District. So what I'd like to do is just go through a couple of the items that the Water Agency does, and then we'll maybe turn our focus to Lake Kachuma and talk about where we are on Lake Kachuma. But just briefly, the County Water Agency is actually a special district of the state of California, which its boundaries are the border of the county. So while it's a special district, it is administered by the Board of Supervisors, with the Board of Supervisors acting as the Board of Directors for the County Water Agency. The County Water Agency was actually originally set up to contract for 2 federal projects that came to Santa Barbara County back in they were planned in the 40s and implemented in the 50s, that being the Twitchell project up in northern Santa Barbara County, and of course the Kachuma project, which serves the South Coast and the San Ynez Valley. Over the years, our involvement in Kachuma and Twitchell have varied depending on its need. Yield studies, siltation surveys. We've done updated sediment surveys to find the capacity of both those reservoirs over time. Provided water availability forecasts based on ongoing drought operations, and then also have done items such as inflow forecasts based on both flood flow forecast inflows and then after the flood peak how much water is in the system yet to run into Lake Cachuma, which is helpful to determine how full the lake would get if it's not spilling, or how long a spill would go, which then would allow member units access to free spill water. Other items that the Water Agency has done over the years includes all sorts of technical studies, the San Ynez River model, which now is being looked at for a conversion to what's called riverware. I mentioned sediment surveys and then other technical items as needed. Groundwater, the Water Agency has been involved in groundwater throughout the county for a long time, mostly just historical monitoring. We have a contract with the United States Geological Survey to monitor wells throughout the county, a couple hundred wells, which helps track the status of our groundwater basins. Most recently, the state has implemented new regulations, first with what's called CASGEM, which is California. It's basically monitoring the groundwater levels. And then now most recently, the SGMA process, which is the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which requires various groundwater basins to be in a sustainable state within the next 20 years. Other things that we've done which help benefit both the Twitchell and the Cachuma project include a cloud seeding program every year, of which the city is a partner in that project, which we're very appreciative. However, water purveyors throughout the county help fund that, of which the Water Agency pays half of that, and then the purveyors pay the other half, so it's a cooperative program. We have also been the centerpiece of the Integrated Regional Water Management Planning effort, or IRWMP, of which our county, including the city, has received many millions of dollars in grant funds that have come to us. And then we've also done other items such as what's called the RWIP, or the Regional Water Management Water Efficiency Program, and that's a program, again, with all the water purveyors, and the County Water Agency helps support that. And we do all sorts of things, including get grants for, I believe, RWIP got the conversion of turf through the USBR grants and other items like that. And then most recently, we completed a long-term water study at the direction of our board, which looks out many years to see what available water supplies, could be for our community. Again, north to south, recognizing North County is in a little different situation than South County, and recognizing those differences, what are the available sources. We're funded through a number of areas. We do get a dedicated portion of the property tax as set by Proposition 13. We also get intergovernmental revenue, like money from purveyors for RWEP and cloud seeding and IRWMP. And then also, we are also actively pursuing grants as well. So now what I'd like to do is switch more to Lake Cachuma. And Mr. Hagmark has put a graph up on the screen which shows basically where we try to track every drop, counting the drops now, Lake Cachuma. And we do this on a monthly basis at month end. And this particular graph is as of April 30th. And the reason why it comes out, this has just basically come out, is because we get the final reports from the Bureau of Reclamation for the downstream water accounts, which is that big orange bar in the middle there. And then also how much carryover water the Cachuma member units, including the city, have in the lake. And that's reported to us by the Cachuma Operations and Maintenance Board. And then other items such as the fish account and imported water come from different sources. So what we end up with is showing where the lake is and how much water is left. And at a total of about 28,000 acre feet, you can see that water available for delivery to the member units, and I refer to the member units as the 5 agencies that participate in the Cachuma contract. That includes the San Ynez River Water Conservation District, ID1, Goleta Water District, the City of Santa Barbara, Montecito Water District, and Carpinteria Water District. So,
Could you describe how the minimum pool was established?
okay, I'll move into that. So the minimum pool was established by the contract upgrade back in 1994, early 90s, ultimately signed by the Water Agency in, I believe, 1996. And I think the minimum pool has a function of a couple of different items. One is that you have a facility that is a living lake that we want to make sure that we have a unique microenvironment out there at Kachuma Lake. If you've ever been up there and been on the Eagle tours, you can really appreciate the environment that we have up there. And we want to be sure that we preserve a living lake. Second, we have an issue of conveyance of state water through the reservoir, which all the South Coast member units are becoming more and more reliant on, because state water is pumped in at the dam. Currently, the pump barge as it sits is about midway to the top of the lake, which doesn't really exist anymore because the lake's so low, but near to the Tecolote Tunnel. Right now, the Kachuma Operations Maintenance Board, COM, is moving that pump barge closer to the park itself. But to stretch that gap, the lake was designed to be utilized as the conveyance facility to get state water from the dam to the Tecolote Tunnel through the pump barge. So, and then lastly, there is an operating park that has hundreds of thousands of visitors a year that come to this community and add to our economic vitality, including the city of Santa Barbara's, because most of them come from the south and would come through the city. So I think the minimum pool functions for a number of valuable purposes and deserves to be maintained, if nothing else, for your viability of moving the state water project through the lake.
So numerically, was there a basis for coming up with that figure, the 12,000?
Mr. Chair, I'm not sure of the actual basis for it, other than in prior contracts, the minimum pool is higher. I believe the minimum pool, as the lake was originally established, I think was 32,000, and it was reduced. So the actual basis for what that was calculated at, I don't know how that came about, or whether it was a negotiated number trying to balance all of these issues, because obviously water supply is a paramount need of Lake Kachuma. But it also has other vital functions as well, and they all work together quite well. I don't think one trumps any of the others, but there is a level where, unlike Gibraltar, where it can actually go totally dry, I don't think that would be a desirable case for anybody in the case of Lake Kachuma. It wouldn't serve anybody.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. Tom, does the evaporation, which is given to each of these categories, does that also affect the minimum pool? Do they actually take a percentage of evaporation also?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Davis, I believe that's something that we'll get to when there's no other source to be evaporated. And we can talk about the evaporation, maybe go into that, because that's really the problematic issue that we have now.
Right.
We have gotten to a point where there is no other account to evaporate. The minimum pool is stated in the contract as 12,000. It's not evaporated from the time the lake spills over time. So we're going to get down, and that 12,000 is preserved. Now, when there's no other water in the lake and you continue to have evaporation, what's going to happen? Well, obviously, you can't stop evaporation, so it's going to continue. But until then, what we did in working with the member units and the Bureau of Reclamation is heading into this water year, which starts October 1 of last year, so October 1, 2015, we had a small sliver of unallocated water, and that's that blue slice right at the top. And what we did is agree with all the member units that starting October 1, we are going to have carryover maintained whole and subject to no evaporation until that unallocated water is gone, which is kind of what happens in the lake anyways. Evaporation goes on every single year. So after the lake first spills and then the member units are taking their water, there's evaporation going on, and that's the water that is yet to be allocated. It's unallocated water that's evaporating. It's not the minimum pool. It's not the downstream water credits. It's not the fish accounts. It's water that is yet to be allocated. So that's kind of what we did this year. But there's a big difference this year. By contract, carryover water is subject to evaporation. So when you start a beginning year in a normal year and the full 25,000 acre feet is allocated to the member units, that water is not evaporated through that whole water year. So it stays intact. Now, evaporation is happening, so other water is being evaporated, which is your future water that's being evaporated, but current water is held. When you have held whole. When you get into carryover water, carryover water is subject to evaporation proportional to the volume in the lake. So when the lake is lower, your carryover water takes a bigger hit. We actually were hitting a point
But
where
doesn't your evaporation rate go down also as the lake gets lower?
the evaporation rate goes down, but the proportion goes up. Because there's less water left in the lake. Normally, when you have a lake that's at 193,000 and you have 23 or 25,000 allocated, or in the case of almost a full lake and a carryover of a couple thousand, the percentage is quite small. Now it's 22% of the water left in the lake is your carryover. So it would take, and considering that the other accounts aren't evaporated, it takes a huge hit. And that's the unfortunate reality of where we got. We got to this point extremely fast, and now the reality is that evaporation is going to take its toll because we got here this fast. Now, going back to what I was indicating is the start of this year, we worked out a deal with the Bureau of Reclamation to say, look, let's maintain the carryover water whole and not subject it to evaporation, and take the entire lake's evaporation out of the unallocated water sliced at the top. We're slowly burning through that. That will accelerate as we get into the warmer months, and then they'll reach a point in time where the party's over, and then carryover water will be evaporated, and will be evaporated quite significantly because there's nothing else to evaporate. We're just at that point where it's a zero-sum game. There's nothing left.
So there really isn't an incentive for the conservation of the carryover water, because in fact it's going to eat itself up pretty quick once you get there.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Commissioner Davis, to the extent that where we're at now, that's an issue, but it leads to a point of that we not get to this point again in the future, where we have a safe yield issue, where you have a assured allocation of water that you don't have to worry about this. It also sets up the question of maybe as we get to the lower end of the lake again in future years, that we have an evaporation pool that would then be planned from the start, that we would have that pool of water left that would allow your water to be kept in there whole. But it's a zero-sum game.
Yeah,
that will simply take away water that could be otherwise allocated in other years. Water does evaporate, and I think part of the differences here is that when you look at your other sources like state water, if you hold state water in San Luis Reservoir, it's a freebie. You don't get charged evaporation. But that doesn't mean evaporation isn't happening in San Luis Reservoir either. It's just that the state calculates it and has basically, in effect, an evaporation calculation built in, so your numbers are smaller. So you can store water in there, and it sounds great, but in reality, if you were subject to evaporation, that number would be bigger too, and then you'd be in the same spot saying, well, gosh, I should really use that water because it's evaporating. But the state kind of factored that in, and so you get that, at a different thing. We could do the same thing at Kachuma, where we could calculate an evaporation pool over the life cycle of the drought and try to calculate how your water could sit there evaporation free for 7 years, but it would come at a cost. There's no freebies here. It's going to come out one way or the other.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, very problematic when you get to this low, especially when you have other accounts like what's called the BNA, ANA, that's below narrows and above narrows accounts. Those are accounts in the lake set by the state for downstream water rights purposes, and by order of the state, those are not subject to evaporation at all. But yet it's a significant portion of the reservoir's volume now. Now that will be gone this summer. The downstream water rights release will start soon, July or August. And according to our meetings with the San Ynez River Water Conservation District, called the Parent District, they intend to exhaust that entire amount of water this summer, which will lower the lake even further. That's necessitating the move of the barge now, but will also lower the evaporation rates. So when that water is gone, any remaining carryover water will have somewhat less of a burden to bear in terms of evaporation. Are there any more questions on evaporation? That took up quite a bit of what I was going to talk about, but we I was asked by Mr. Hagmark to talk about, well, how do you think we would handle evaporation in 2017? And that's a difficult question. What was it? Yogi Berra said the problem with predictions is that it involves the future. If we have inflow in 2017, which we all hope we do have, if it is not a significant inflow and on the order of tens of thousands of acre feet, then I think we have to look at, again, maybe establishing an evaporative pool to address this very issue, along with any allocation we make, because otherwise we'll just be right back in the same situation again. The ideal situation would be we get a big inflow, and then these accounts become a smaller portion of the lake, and then the unallocated water in the lake would be the evaporative source in the future. But it all depends on where we are in 2017. If we do not get inflow in 2017, and the minimum pool continues to evaporate at that point, because that would be the only water left in the lake, and it would be the only source that could evaporate. You could end up with a problem of getting your state water through the lake as that lake falls. I don't know at what point the pump barge would be ineffective below the 12,000. I know they factored that in when they moved that, so I think there is some room in there, whether it's a whole year or not. It might be something that the South Coast member units look into augmenting the minimum pool with imported water, especially during the months when your use is low, like in December and January, where there's capacity and you could move water in, understanding that comes at a cost, that water does cost you. And so, but again, this is your conduit to get state water to the South Coast as well. In terms of the contract for the project, the contract with the Water Agency and the Bureau of Reclamation is set to expire in 2020. It's suggested in the contract that we would start working on a renewal of that contract several years in advance. So I think that's something we're looking at starting at some point soon. As a part of that, I think we need to look at several factors in a new contract. One would be this evaporation issue when we get down this low, and how do we address it? Do we reserve an evaporative pool only when we get down this low? Do we go to a straight safe yield, which a safe yield approach would be calculate the critical drought period, and then using modeling look at what you could get even through this drought period. We might be redefining the critical drought period right now. We certainly are for the last 5 years. For the trailing 5 years, beats any previous drought period of 5 years, and some of those records in the case of the city of Santa Barbara go back well over 100 years. And in the case of Gibraltar Dam, which is our indicator for the San Ynez River, goes back almost 100 years. So with 100 years of record, this is the 5-year drought of record. Will it be the 7-year drought of record? That's yet to be seen. But these are things that we need to look at in a new contract with the Bureau of Reclamation. I think another issue that needs to be looked at is when we entered into this contract, there was an allocation that was put into the contract of 25,700 acre feet per year. But several things changed since 1996. First of all, the reservoir, of course, has been subject to siltation, and although some of that was mitigated by raising the level of the lake in 2004 by 3 feet, but then also operations such as the downstream water accounts and fully understanding how those requirements affect the reservoir, and then also releases for endangered species steelhead fish downstream of the dam. That came in after the 1996 contract. So all of these things factor in that we never went back and looked at, well, what does that mean for the yield? So I think a new contract absolutely has to have a 5-year rotating recalculation of what the yield should be for the reservoir, because all of the member units get a number from the Bureau of Reclamation, say, wow, well, I have this much water a year. Well, you don't. You think you did, but you don't. And that's what we saw this year. This year you got 0. Whereas if we were on a safe yield that we had calculated at some point past, you might be looking at an allocation out of Kachuma between 15 and 20,000 acre feet, and wouldn't that be nice right now? That also comes at a cost for the previous years because you got to make up that shortage with that more expensive water. But right now it looks pretty good. On top of the millions of dollars that it's costing to have this pump barge installed and operated. And so all these costs have to be weighed off as to what, what is the best thing to do. And then, so a 5-year cycle that recalculates what the yield should be based on whatever the new forces are going to be. We're going to have a new biological opinion that's going to come out of the National Marine Fisheries Service that may or may not change how much water has to be released from the dam for endangered species in the future. And if that happens, that will come directly out of your yield. It has to. It's a zero-sum game. There's only so much water in the lake. So all those things have to be factored in. Now, we have initiated a safe yield study for Kachuma, but in consultation with all your member unit managers, we agreed to stop at that point because there are some critical factors that need to be understood before we actually say, well, this is what the new safe yield of the reservoir is. First is, are we in the critical drought or not? Because if we have 2 more dry years, including potentially a year that has some runoff into it, over the critical 7-year period, which is 45 to 52, there was inflow to the lake, but over the 7-year period, it was the dry period. And so we have to really see after 7 years, where are we? And we're in year 5. So we really think we need 2 more years of data. If we spill next year, then we would go back and say, well, the 45 to 52 critical drought period stands. The other thing we need to know is, are there any changes from the state in terms of downstream water rights? That would have an impact as well. And then lastly, when National Marine Fisheries finishes its consultation with the Bureau of Reclamation, how much water will be released each year for fish. And until you have all those pieces, you don't really have an accurate a safe yield. However, using what we have right now, we do know that the safe yield of the lake would be significantly lower than what it is right now, which is no surprise. That's what we see right in front of us with a 0 allocation this year.
Mr. Chair? Yeah, you talked about the timeline. If the agreement is up in 2020 and all those factors are still in the air 3 years from now, right, what's going to happen?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner Davis, I think what we would have to do is use the information that we have at the time and then rely on a recalculation in 5 years.
Okay.
Because that would be the beauty of recalculating that through a 25-year contract every 5 years. Use the information you have at the time. That's all you really know. And then every 5 years, update it.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
I think I would just summarize, if there's no other questions, that I think everybody, including the county, recognizes how crucial Kachuma is as a water supply reservoir. I will mention that the Bureau of Reclamation also considers recreation as a co-equal project purpose and has value too. Now, we've had discussions with that about whether or not those two uses are at odds, and I submit to you they're not, because at no point has the park at Lake Kachuma ever said, hey, we need a lake that's this high. Understood the minimum pool is 12,000, understand the lake fluctuates wildly through time, they coexist. And included in that is the environmental resources that have developed out there. And if you've been out there, or if you haven't been on the Eagle Cruise, you need to go, even today. It's a fascinating place. Many of you may know I grew up going to that lake, and I really appreciate its natural wonder, and it's worth protecting. And a minimum pool at least protects a living lake rather than a wasteland. It deserves treatment like that. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Is any other questions or comments from the commission?
All right, well, I will continue then with
Mr. Chair, I just want to thank Mr. Favorham for coming, because I think it's been an eye-opening discussion for us in that regard, and your challenges going forward are pretty significant. So, we look forward to working with you, obviously.
Mr. Chair, Commissioners, and likewise, we're in this all together. We've been meeting monthly with your staff and other Kachuma member unit managers, and these issues are difficult, but we have to work through them together, and we appreciate your staff's attendance at all our meetings and working with us in a very positive manner. We appreciate that.
I appreciate your comment of quoting Yogi Berra's statement about that. Obviously, the hydrologic reality can be very different from what you forecast. The Colorado River is a classic example of how they got it wrong. And the idea of reevaluating periodically sounds very smart to me. So thanks.
So at this point, I'm just going to finish up with the discussion on Kachuma. The barge relocation is on track, and I think they have a tentative timeline of shutdown to move the barge in late June. Just wanted to bring in this picture here, just kind of explain what's going on. Local photographer picked this up. The intake to the tower is over here in this grassy meadow. Our current barge is sitting right here, and you can vaguely make out these little piles that go all the way over here. This is the contractor right now setting all these piles that they're going to tie the HDPE line to, and it's going to extend from its current location over to approximately here, where the new barge is going to be the existing barge is going to be relocated to in late June. But when you know how full this lake should be, and the water should be over here and way beyond this point, it is pretty frightening. So, drought response capital. I just have one project I'm going to highlight here. It's the DSAL project update. They are pouring concrete pads over the last week or so for the treatment units. As you can see here, they have them in various stages. The actual treatment units are on a ship and in transit to Long Beach Harbor. They should be getting here, I think, next week or the week after. And then they'll be scheduling delivery to the site in early June. They'll be waiting for the concrete here to meet its strength before they set those treatment units on it. As far as the offshore work goes, they're working on satisfying permit conditions. There's a lot of assessment work that needs to be done. I do have to admit I've been kind of frustrated with this component of the project. We had been pushing the contractor to have completed some of this work back in November, and it's a little frustrating that this didn't take a priority for them, or they didn't find the time to fit this in. And so where we're getting down to it is we're running out of float in the schedule, and we're going to be talking about this, but their current schedule still shows water delivery in October, but there are a lot of threats to that schedule, and I just wanted to raise that, and I expect to provide even more information next month on that. The electrical work is on, it seems like there's a lot of stuff. The offshore work is on the critical path, meaning any delays are going to push that schedule. Electrical work is on the critical path. One of the key components to the electrical work, the contractor needs to finish up his end so that SCE can do their work, because ultimately these filters actually have to ripen, which means we need to bring in seawater for month and a half, ripen up these filters so that they'll do their job. And in order to do that, you got to have the power there to pump the water onshore to ripen the filters so that we can actually go into production. So there is a sequence of events happening. We do have a big high-level meeting with IDE and Kiewit next Wednesday, hoping to resolve some of this. We have been talking, and I think our consultant coined the word designated worrier. We need someone who is looking at all the different components and making sure they're coming together. It seems that everybody's kind of doing their thing, but we seem to be missing this designated worrier who's overseeing all of it and making sure everything is coming together simultaneously. We do understand this is a complicated project, but certainly we want the contractor to be successful. Our team, Corollo, who's been on site as well, has been, going the extra mile to say, have you thought about this? Are you working on this? Do you know this takes time? And so I do believe we've been working collaboratively with the contractor. I think everyone's intent is to finish this project on time, but we will keep the commission and the public informed of how this is moving along. As far as the Montecito water sales agreement, this was an item on today's agenda, which we pulled. I just wanted to briefly say that we have completed the funding agreement and provided that to Montecito. And at this point, they want to discuss that funding agreement longer. And so I don't have a timeline for how long those discussions are going to go on. This is basically to cover the costs associated with completing the water sales agreement. There's a lot of technical and legal services that are required to finish those negotiations. Once it is done, we will bring it back. Hopefully the timing works out that we can make it to Water Commission and Council. If there is, we do certainly want to keep this discussion moving forward. We will make sure that we do have another discussion with Council and there's with Water Commission, and that information is shared.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, what's the target date that the agreement's looking at for first purchase?
They, I guess our mutual agreed time was to finish negotiations by October. And working with their general manager, we had laid out, these are the technical support services that we need to get to that point of being able to enter into an agreement, and so they're wanting to discuss. Right now, they're challenged with putting out up to $500,000 to complete the water sales agreement. They have some concerns about putting out that much money, and so I think we're going to continue to talk about that.
Okay, but let's just say on the critical path, they essentially, you complete the agreement. What's then the critical path construction-wise to get to actual deliveries?
Yes.
Rough.
Commissioner Davis, we have told them 2 years. Okay. 2 years from completion of the water sales agreement. Based on what we know now, there's information that will be developed because the critical path right now runs through the conveyance system. We do believe we can complete the expansion of the desal facility in about 12 months, but ultimately what ends up being about 3 miles of pipe that needs to be put in, the permitting for that and design of that we anticipate could take up to 2 years. And I think what we want to do is kind of develop the preliminary design for that and confirm it is 2 years. It may be less, it may be more. So, yeah.
And that would basically get the water to the South Coast conduit. So at that point, it conceivably could be delivered to other people besides Montecito also.
Correct. I think that the key is that we are preparing for the fact that we may have limited or no surface waters. And so in order to effectuate this water sales agreement, we would need this pipeline to move that water to them. Mm-hmm. So let's take you to Water Conservation Program, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Dyer to talk about that. Mm-hmm.
Jordan. Yep.
Going back to recycling, I'm trying not to read between the lines too harshly. Are you giving up on that extra 1 million gallons a day of recycling?
I am not. I'm just I'm really focused on right now is getting through this summer and meeting the peak demands of this summer, and continuing to work on the long-term solution.
Is there any moving forward on
Oh, your mic's.
But is there any moving forward on discussion on liability for what we paid for versus what we're getting? And is it a equipment mistake, or is the initial assessment of being able to get to 1 million or 2.5 million gallons per day just wrong?
There, due to the legal issues involved in this, I can't go into a lot of details, but it is extremely complicated, and there is responsibility by the original designer. There is responsibility involvement in the contractor and the contractor subs that make resolving this complicated.
And is it technically feasible to do 2.5 million per day?
Yes.
Okay, so it's not an option out there that's still not attainable.
Right. It is obtainable with the right equipment, operating in the right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I probably don't have to tell you that every time we have a report on that, or it goes out to the public, that's like the number one question. You know, how do we get in this situation and what are we doing to fix it? So
Yeah.
I appreciate that there's legal nuances that have to be watched there, but that's the number one question I get pummeled about every time somebody says, well, we're still having a problem with recycled water. So.
Yeah, and I, more than anybody, share that frustration, I believe we're doing everything we can internally to try and get this facility to maximize what it can produce, at least to this peak summer demand. After the peak summer demand, the facility has no problem keeping up with the rest of the year, and focused on getting it to its design capacity will be the next hurdle after we get to the summer. Ms. Dyer.
Okay, my name's Kelly Dyer. I'm the Water Supply Manager. I'm speaking on behalf of Madeline Ward, our Water Conservation Coordinator, who could not be here today. We recently had our WaterWise High School Video Contest. This is an annual county-wide program in its 17th year. All high schools in Santa Barbara County can participate, and it's a contest provided by the network of Santa Barbara County water providers. This program is a good opportunity for local students to showcase their creative filmmaking skills. They prepare 30-second videos, and the videos are judged based on originality, entertainment value, accuracy, production quality, and value of the information. And the winning videos are used as public service announcement ads in movie theaters. Sponsors donate prizes to the first, second, and third People's Choice and Honorable Mention student winners. And the network of Santa Barbara County water providers award checks to the schools of the winning teams. So this year, $2,400 was donated to Santa Barbara County schools this year from this program. And the corporate sponsors were Ramada Santa Barbara, True Nature Landscape Architecture, Ewing Irrigation, All Around Landscape Supply, and NCM. So we thank all of the sponsors for this great program. This year, in 2016, there were 22 video entries. That's more than we've ever had before. The theme was water conservation in the forecast, how to be water wise outside, rain or shine. And the winners this year came from Carpinteria High, the Dunn School, and Santa Barbara High. So congratulations to the winners, and we look forward to seeing the videos in the movie theaters. And now we have a short video clip of the first place winner. The first place winner was Waterwise Rain or Shine by Jeanette Fentone from Carpinteria High School. Okay. All right. Very nice. So the next item is our 2015 Urban Water Management Plan. This was an item that we discussed last month as a status update. And when we talked last month, the draft plan was not yet available. So there was a request by the Water Commission to come back after seeing the draft Urban Water Management Plan, which was released for public review on April 29th, which began the 60-day noticing period before the public hearing, which is scheduled for June 28th. And the adopted plan is due to the state July 1st. You'll remember from our last conversation, this was a very compressed schedule. The final guidelines from the state were released in March. So it was quite a significant effort to try and get this report done on time and into the state on time. This is a document that's required by state law every 5 years. It adopts the 2020 target for water use at 117 gallons per capita per day. That number is something that we track every month and present to Water Commission every month to see how we're doing with meeting that target. We do not see any issues for the city to meet our goals for the state requirements on water conservation. In fact, we will likely exceed them as we are currently. Even in non-drought conditions, we expect to exceed the goals.
Quick question, the population that's used for the per capita, is that include visitors?
It does not, Chair Commissioner. It does not include. It's census data based on people who actually live in Santa Barbara.
So really, if you count the people that are actually using the water as visitors, also would be considerably lower, or per capita, because the
Correct.
population is bigger.
Correct. So I wanted to explain a little bit, just to put the urban water management plan into context of what it is to the city. The city's long-term water supply plan, that should say water supply plan, not, there's a couple of typos in there. That is the city's policy document for water supply management, and the last long-term water supply plan was adopted in 2011. That is our policy document for all of our decision-making on our water supply. Our long-term water supply plan then feeds into our urban water management report. The urban water management plan is really a snapshot of where we are with our water supply planning. Like I said, we do this every 5 years. It's a very specific format of reporting that's required by the state. So we have a checklist we have to follow in order to comply with the urban water management plan requirements. We are aware that there's a number of issues, issues that feed into our long-term planning. Tom Farum from the county already mentioned something, forthcoming issues with the Kachuma project. At some point, we will have to reevaluate our long-term water supply plan to factor in the current drought, the new drought of record, potential changes to the Kachuma operational yield. We'll need to reevaluate the future role of desalination and evaluate other potential options such as potable reuse or other options that may be available, groundwater banking programs. We're currently conducting a potable reuse feasibility study, and the information from that study will feed into our long-term water supply plan. And we also may have other planning objectives. The urban water management plan really just compares your supply and your demand and looks at a reliability perspective only. But our long-term water supply plan, we want to evaluate all of the decision factors, including costs, environmental impacts, water quality, and we can define what those planning objectives will be when we go through the planning process, but we'll be looking at multiple objectives in our long-term water supply plan. We do have a goal to update our long-term water supply plan before the next cycle of 2020 urban water management plans. Of course, we don't know when some of the information will become available on the Kachuma project, so we'll have to assess at what point we feel that we have accurate information to do projections for our long-term water supply. I did want to mention that while we're required to report to the state every 5 years on our urban water management plan, there's nothing that would prevent us from updating it more frequently if we found that to be appropriate. We could amend our urban water management plan every year. So if we get information between now and 2020 and decide we want to update our urban water management plan, we could do so. So I wanted to open it up to the Water Commission, if you've had a chance to read through the report and see if you had any initial comments. Like I said, this is going to City Council June 28th for a public hearing.
Any comments? Davis?
Well, first I want to thank staff for bringing this back since we hadn't seen the plan. And I personally had not basically really understood the nature of the plan. Now that I see that, I understand the box that we're in relative to the fact that these major factors, be it Kachuma or the drought of record, et cetera, it's very hard basically to update our long-term water supply plan until you have that. So everything is a chicken before the egg type of situation. That said, going forward, let's just say we have an 8 or 9 year drought, and we may not have any of that information even by 2020. And so I think we're going to be hard pressed to wait another 5 years to update the long-term water supply plan. So further discussion as to what do we do in that interim period if in fact the drought does continue, because we're again addressing the current drought is number one, but again setting ourselves up for addressing the long-term issues is number two. And obviously the first thing that's going to come up is the long-term role of desal, because it's going to be just pushed to the forefront if in fact this drought continues. Looking at the plan itself, and I did take some time to review through that, it is a matter of checking the boxes. And again, since we're relying on the 2011 plan, nothing really changes in that regard. So anyway, I just wanted to thank you for bringing it back. I'm assuming we've not received any public comment to date.
Chair, we have not received any comments yet.
All right. Okay, thank you.
I noted that the vulnerability, even if there were water in the Santa Ynez River, to catastrophic events was stressed more than I think than it was in the 2011 plan, so I was glad to see that. Any other comments? Ms. Burney.
First, I want to second Commissioner Davis's comments. Definitely appreciate you all bringing it back and understand the situation that you're in. Building on the long-term water supply plan, I actually would like to suggest that the Commission recommend we put a date on when we would start that, being somewhere around, I was thinking 2018. Last time we talked, I think you said it takes about a year. Taking into consideration that we might be in the middle of a drought still, it might take longer than a year. So that's why I was thinking 2018 with the goal of having it done by 2020 so we can use it for the next IRWIMP. So that was one thing I wanted to suggest to the Commission. And then I had a couple just more things specifically with the IRWIMP, and I think this might be, so one of the things we're talking about in there is expanding recycled water, I think by 300 acre feet per year, but given one, the constraints of our existing recycled water, and two, the potential to move towards some type of potable reuse, I actually question that if we should do that. I don't think we should say that we're going to do that in the next 5 years. I'm not certain that we should. I don't think we have the information available that, one, we actually have the capacity to do it, or that it's in the best interest of the community to do so given our other options going forward. And then one kind of just nitpicky thing, on page 29, table 6 has an annual gross water use for 1996 to 2010 every single year, and then it just skips to 2015. It doesn't have 2011 through 2014 in that table. And it says in the narrative that it has an annual, but it's missing a few years. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Other comments? Doesn't look like it. Thank you for the presentation. That brings us to the end of item A1, or is there more? 6A1.
That completes that item.
Whoops. Thank you. We have pulled item 6B, so we would now be on item 6C, the proposed fiscal year 17 water rates and fees.
Thank you, Chair Keller, members of the Commission. My name is Kelly Dyer, Water Supply Manager, and I'm here to present our proposed fiscal year 17 water rates. Kathy Taylor, the Water System Manager, is here today as well to present proposed fiscal year 17 water fees. So the difference is with water rates, those are what show up on the monthly bills that our customers receive, and the fees are one-time water-related expenses for services that we provide. The water rates were presented to City Council in April last month, and the Prop 218 notices have been mailed. Just wanted to provide a summary of some of the key items that the fiscal year 17 rates are based on. The rates assume continued drought conditions through fiscal year 18, and with that, there are additional drought-related expenses. Our supplies have become more expensive as we have transitioned to alternative supplies. And we have accounted for the cost of full desal operation, water purchases, and the Combe Emergency Pump Project, as well as other drought-related costs. The water rates also factor in 35% water conservation, which is the required level of conservation under our Stage 3 declaration. The water rates also, we have requirements. Oh, excuse me.
I don't know what's.
Is that better? Okay. We have a requirement to meet debt coverage ratio of 1.25. This was a requirement of our CCWA water supply agreement, as well as other bonds that the city has for water projects. In fiscal year 2015, we did not meet our coverage ratio of 1.25. Our revenues came in lower than projected, that we were in a drought and asking for additional conservation, and we missed our coverage ratio slightly. Since then, we have amended our water supply agreement with CCWA, Central Coast Water Authority, who is the water purveyor for our imported water. We've amended that contract to be able to use our rate stabilization fund, which is $5 million currently in, that's the current balance of our rate stabilization fund. The purpose of that fund is we set it aside. In previous years, we did not count it as revenue, and so it's available to count as revenue in future years if our actual revenues come in lower than projected. So it can be used to meet our debt coverage requirement going forward now that we've amended our agreement with CCWA. So it serves as a contingency to help meet our debt coverage requirements. The rate model and our financial planning we don't plan to use the rate stabilization fund. That's really contingency for if things do not go as planned, if revenues come in lower than planned, or if expenses end up being higher than planned. So our proposed fiscal year 2017 rates do not assume any use of the rate stabilization fund, and it shows a projected 1.29 coverage, which is just slightly above the 1.25 required. I will say there's not a lot of wiggle room with that. That's pretty low. It's lower than we've been in previous years. And I'll talk more about the volatility of that coverage requirement. I do think it's likely that we would have to use this rate stabilization fund next year, potentially. It's a likely scenario if the drought continues.
Mr. Chair, Davis, just before you move off of that one, going up there under the continued drought, are those expenses, are those one-time expenses, short-term expenses, or blended into a long-term rate?
They're expenses that are only during drought conditions.
Okay, so for hypothetical purposes, 3 years from now, we're out of the drought, right? We're no longer basically then having those as part of are we going to drop rates at that point?
Chair Keller, Commissioner Davis, it's hard for me to say at this point. We're going to be reevaluating our financial plan every year.
I understand that. Again, because we get to the rate stabilization and everything else that goes into the blend. I think just that component, if those components go away, the emergency pump project and water purchases, if they go away, they'd be deducted out of the total operational costs, and obviously.
Commissioner Davis, that's correct. Those expenses would go away. There may be other capital projects coming up in the future.
Great. Okay, thank you.
And then finally, I wanted to make it clear that all of our rate analyses are are subject to state requirements. For Prop 218, it requires a cost of service analysis. We hired an expert rate consultant to construct our water rate model and do that analysis. And we also have our California Urban Water Conservation Council best management practices. The city is signed a memorandum of understanding with the state, and part of that requires that we collect no more than 30% of our total revenue from fixed charges. And the idea behind it is that if the majority of your revenue is from volumetric charges based on water usage, it really helps with conservation. People can control their water bills based on how much water they use. So customer impacts from the proposed fiscal year 2017 water rates for single-family residential. For single-family residential user, low water user using 4 units a month, the existing bill is $40.29. The proposed bill would be $44.06 for a $3.77 increase. A moderate water user using 10 units per month would have an existing bill of $91.35, and that would increase to $121.88 for an increase of $30.53. And a high water user using 20 units per month has an existing bill of $216.77. That would increase to $296.78 for an increase of $80.01. I wanted to just take a moment to show where we've been over the last few years with the drought and how water bills have changed over the last few years. And so going back to fiscal year 14, a single-family residential customer using 12 units of water per month was paying $67.81. If they did not reduce their water use at all through the entire drought, then in fiscal year 2017, they'd be paying $147.82. So that's about an $80 increase. For someone who has been conserving and has reduced their water use according to the requirements that we've had, with initially starting at 20%, then 25%, then 35%, the bill would have gone from $67.81 in fiscal year 2014 using 12 units a month to $95.94 using 8 units a month. And so that's about roughly a $30 increase compared to the $80 increase if they did not reduce their water use. This shows a comparison of the city's water rates against our neighboring South Coast water agencies. All of these are proposed water rates. None of them have yet been adopted, so they are subject to change, but it just wanted to give you a sense of where we are based on the latest information. For low water users, the city has some of the lower water bills. The city and Goleta have lower water bills than Montecito and Carpinteria for low water users. For moderate water users, we all are sort of, we fall roughly in the same range. So we're kind of in line with our neighboring water agencies with moderate water use of 10 units per month. And then for high water use at 20 units per month, we have the highest bills compared with the other South Coast water agencies. Okay, so now going into our financial plan, this was something that was presented back in April. The blue is our operating expenses. The purple is our debt service. The orange are desal costs. That includes both debt service and operating. And the green is the capital expenses. So we're currently in fiscal year 2016, and the green line, let me start with the red line. The red line is our revenue under existing adopted fiscal year 16 water rates. So looking at FY16, you can see that we had planned for our revenues to be lower than our expenses and use some money from reserves to make up the difference. If we did not increase water rates and we increase our conservation target, we expect that our revenues would go down. That's the red line. And so we're looking at a 21% increase in revenue for FY17 compared to the red line. But you can see that even in FY17, our revenues still do not meet our total costs for service. And so again, we would plan to use money from reserves in fiscal year 2017. Next slide. This shows our reserve balances. This was the reserve balances at the time we were doing our financial planning for development of fiscal year 2017 water rates. And for FY16, we'd end the year, we were projecting to end the year right at about policy levels, which is the red line. And then going back, and then for FY17, with the substantial use of reserves, we'd end the year about $6 million below policy levels. Since we did this financial analysis, we've had our third quarter review and are now have updated information on our revenues and expenditures. And there's really a big difference in our expenditures. I'm not seeing it on the chart here, but what we're seeing is that at the end of the year, we expect to be about $5 million above policy for our reserve balance. And the reason for that is because we've cut back spending in the drought fund. So we had $3 million budgeted for supplemental water purchases. And we recently secured an agreement with AVEC, Antelope Valley East Kern County Water Agency, to purchase 4,000 acre-feet of water. In previous years, that would have been pretty expensive to buy that amount of water. We've had agreements that in previous years upwards of $1,000 an acre-foot. This agreement in particular, we've reached a deal that was much more cost-effective, and so we're able to return that money that was budgeted for water purchases back to reserves. So that's almost $3 million we're sending back. And we also had budgeted in the drought fund a couple $1 million for rehabilitation or replacement of a groundwater well in case one failed. We did not need to use that money this year, so we did not do a well replacement project, and so we'll be returning that money back to reserve. So that's why we have $5 million over the reserve policy for this year, is because we're able to cut back spending from this year in the drought fund. So that $5 million could be used to fill the gap for next year in FY17, where we had a shortfall of $6 million in our below policy levels. Wanted to walk through, so what's driving the rates at this point is the debt coverage and some of the uncertainties that we're facing with our revenues and operating expenses. So I wanted to walk through a couple different scenarios so you can see how our debt coverage calculations change. So under our current water rates, we're projecting that we'll meet our debt coverage by 129%. And we wanted to look at a scenario, well, what if we had $2 million less in our operating budget? That could be if we don't need to buy additional supplemental water next year, for example. We budgeted $2 million for water purchases next year. If we don't need to spend that, our debt coverage would come out at 147%, and we'd have no problems meeting the 125 requirement. And then we looked at another scenario, well, what if our revenues come in lower than projected, if people conserve more than 35%, which is wonderful for water supply, but we would have reduced revenue, and so that for example, if we had $4 million shortfall in revenue, our debt coverage would be 109%. We would not be meeting that 125% target. And I just wanted to remind, in that scenario, we would be looking to use our rate stabilization fund, which has a balance of $5 million. But it would be pushing the limits of how much contingency we had. After that money is gone, we have no other way of meeting our debt coverage.
And that 4 million was put together based on a 40% conservation. If we saw 40% conservation from the community next fiscal year, in the ballpark of 4 million is what we'd be looking at as far as revenue loss.
And I would say that's a conservative estimate on the higher end, but so far, whenever we've had conservative estimates, they've come out to be true with the drought. So we did look at the potential for reducing our fiscal year 2017 water rates. Instead of using that $5 million from this year where we were able to cut back spending, instead of using that for next year's reserve balance and getting closer to the policy levels, we looked at putting $2 million of that into the rate stabilization fund for planned use and meeting our debt coverage in FY17, and that would allow us to reduce the revenue requirements for FY17 for $2 million. In that case, we would end fiscal year 2017 $3 million below policy levels for reserves, and we'd have additional increases to the FY18 rates to make up the difference. So it's really it's a short-term benefit to rates, but eventually we'd have to make up the difference. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but I do want to just make everyone aware of where we are right now. At this point in time, we are now facing the most challenging conditions we've had so far in the drought. We have a lot of uncertainty, particularly with our water supplies, the ability to convey water through Kachuma, the transition to desalination, the recycled water plant production, and how long our groundwater supply is going to last. And so we've got a lot of uncertainties that we're facing this year. We also continue to look for water purchases. This year we had some favorable pricing, but that is not guaranteed. And so we may have additional costs next year if the drought continues on our water purchase costs that might be beyond what we're budgeting right now. And we also have challenging surface water quality. At Kachuma, as water levels drop, the water quality becomes more and more challenging to treat, and we can treat it, but it just increases our costs of treatment. For water usage, we're planning for 35% conservation, but it's really hard to predict people's behaviors. If there's conservation beyond 35%, then that affects our revenues. And the duration of the drought, we really don't know how long this drought's going to end. If it continues, it's likely that rate increases in FY18 would be necessary. We'd have to consider how we continue to meet demands going forward and if that involves expansion of desal or not. And so all of these factors really, and I didn't, debt coverage I already talked about briefly, but as our costs, with the uncertainty in our costs and also in the water usage, that really factors into the debt coverage ratio, which you saw how volatile that can be. And it's very important that we continue to meet that debt coverage. So our recommendation is to maintain the proposed fiscal year 2017 water rates to ensure sufficient debt coverage. And then at the end of this fiscal year, after we've calculated and made sure that we've met our coverage requirements for fiscal year 16, if there's any revenues that can be put into the rate stabilization fund, we would recommend that be done. At this point, based on latest information, it's looking like we might have $2 million that we could put into the rate stabilization fund.
Mr. Chair, I have a question. On that AVEC purchase you referenced, that's then the benefit of that is running money back to the reserves. Is that a water repayment purchase or just a straight purchase?
That was a one-time purchase.
So you don't
So
have to pay back 50% in 10 years or something, or?
We have to return water,
Okay.
but not money.
So how do you show that as a liability in the future, financially?
So in the future, we'd have to return that water either through future state water table A allocations. We also have some water in Dudley Ridge, which we're going to be returning this year. But if it remains in San Luis, any water that remains in San Luis can be used to return that water over time. We have 10 years to return it. And if we find that we don't have the water available to return, we can go back out on the market and purchase.
So financially, do you assume that will work out, or do you actually financially set up a liability for the worst case scenario?
We will have to factor that into future water rates if we end up having to buy.
Right now, you're getting the transfer back to reserves, but you're not recognizing any potential financial transaction for the worst case scenario.
Not at this time.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I'm Kathy Taylor. I'm the
Were
Water
we looking
System
for an action on that from the board, from the commission?
No, if you had any, sorry, Commissioners, if there was any comments that we could take to council, we'd welcome those. The next time this will really be discussed will be the rate hearing in June. And so we just wanted to bring this back in case there was anything we should be sharing with the council from the Water Commission.
Okay, the reason I asked was just shown on here as an action, it was a recommendation, and whether you're looking for a recommendation to support staff's position or not.
Right. Yes. In the end, you recommend that we continue forward with these rates.
Well, I'd make that as a motion.
Yes, we're not quite done with water, but when we get through water, we can touch that, yeah.
my name is Kathy Taylor. I'm the Water System Manager. Good morning. I'm part of the same presentation. And then after my,
Just, you show them as two separate items on the agenda with two separate recommendations. That's just the way the agenda showed up, but that's okay. That's fine.
sorry for the confusion.
Yeah, well, that's why I asked the question.
Good question. Good morning, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. I'm Kathy Taylor, the city's Water System Manager, and I'm here to talk about our buy-in fees and the water service fees. And the water and wastewater buy-in fees, we're working on that still. We're making minor edits to the wording, and we're currently updating the costs to reflect the state water project and Kachuma project assets, as well as the multifamily residential meter capacity. And we're also we're updating this, and we'll expect this to be complete later this summer, and we will return to the Water Commission for discussion and consideration of this item.
This, just another comment on this. When we were going through updating our current buy-in fees, probing into it, we found that our investments in the state water system were not being accounted as assets. Typically, when we go through, finance has a very detailed list of all of our assets, and that helps to develop our buy-in fees. That's the basis of, in order for someone coming in to catch up with everybody who's here, they have to pay those fees. And it appears we've been not including that, and so now we're going through that effort of evaluating those assets that we have bought into through the state water system and accounting for those, which are going to probably drive up our buy-in fees considerably. We will be back, of course, to talk about that, and expect, I expect a significant change in our buy-in fees related to that. And then the multifamily residential, we have been talking about that, and I think it's recognizing that the capacity of our multifamily residential units, because we don't sell a smaller meter than a 5/8, recognizing that their capacity to use water is less than a single-family residential home. This used to be something we had prior to 2013, and when we went through the rate study that was dropped, we do believe it's relevant, and we're bringing that back.
And as for water service fees, we have additions, deletions, and some changes. And the additions We're adding a fee for damage to city water infrastructure, and that will include the time, material, and the water loss recovery costs. And the water loss, that will be an estimate we will need to make. And we're also including review and inspection fees. And these new fees are some internal realignment we have done with our staff. Water staff will be taking on these. In the past, engineering staff have done these tasks. And the deletions, we're deleting the multifamily residential to special occupancy billing. And there are very few. I think they're on the order of maybe 4 in their housing authority units. And we found that these are no longer applicable. These units this billing was structured where there was a Tier 1, no Tier 2, and a Tier 3. And the Tier 1 was down, only allowed 2 units of water. And this was to encourage water conservation. And over time, we've realized that these units have never exceeded that. And plus, it is not in accordance with Prop 218. And additionally, our billing system could really not accommodate this special billing, so we're going to be deleting this.
I wanted to give an example of that. People self-help, senior housing, where you have elderly citizens who aren't paying the water bills, electric bills that's being covered by the building tenant or the main tenant. And so we might have a meter that serves 6 of those units. Same thing with like a transitional housing. Again, folks are only in there for a couple months. They're not paying necessarily the bills. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to make sure there was accountability for water usage. So we have allowed 1 meter to serve, I believe, up to 6 units. And they were allowed 2 HCF per unit was the maximum. And in the cases, there's only 4 properties where we've actually used this. And in all 4 of those cases, there has never been an ongoing situation where they've used over 2 HCF per unit. And like we've mentioned here, our billing system really doesn't accommodate it anyway. And so just to kind of clean the record, we are recommending the deletion of this current fee.
And our water service fees are going to be changing. Our water service connections, they're being updated to reflect updated labor and material costs. And setting and pulling of water meters and installation of temporary fire hydrants, they are being changed to reflect, again, updated labor and material costs. And our 3-inch meters and larger will be done on a time and material basis. And meter reductions outside of the norm, which are 5/8 and 1 inch, will be done on a time and material basis as well.
We found that with some of those unique situations that really the time and material is what's most fair to the customers and to the city, to make sure that they're not overcharged and we're compensated for the time that it takes to actually make the changes.
Have any questions from commissioners?
I got a question, just real quick.
Board?
The connection fee, is that the same thing as the buy-in fee you were talking about, or is that?
No, that will be bringing back the buy-in fee separately. These connection fees are the costs for staff to go out and physically set the meter and make the connection for customers. More on the order of, say, a couple $1,000 typically for that type of installation. Very different from a buy-in fee, which is to buy into the capacity in the system.
Okay.
The others?
Sure.
Mr. Jordan?
So there's a, in the attachment that shows the water rates and fees with the strike-throughs. On page 4, there's just a section that talks about the HCF rate tiers and with the strike-throughs and going out. On any of those I guess, I probably learned this somewhere before, but I've forgotten it. Where is the brunt of the customer base that's seeing the increases? So, for example, on residential single family, you're increasing the 4 HCF about 16%, the next 12 50%, and the over 16 30%. But is the actual number of users that are being affected the most in the middle, in the lower rank? Where are they in that?
So these go back to the rates and our goal of bringing in a 20% revenue increase.
Right.
The way that our average customer now which used to be more like 12. Our average customer is now more like 8.
I'm a perfect example of that slide that Kelly had, the second one, totally.
Okay.
You know, the one that went from 60 to 90 instead of 60 to way, way higher. Perfect example.
Okay.
Right.
Yes. And so, yeah, our average customer, we're saying, is somewhere in the 8 HCF now.
Okay.
So they would see some of the tier 2 costs increase, and so the impact to their bill is going to be a blend, because obviously the impact to tier 1 is pretty small, but the tier 2 is a pretty big jump. So you'll have to, depending on what your water use is. We do have a water use calculator on our website. We encourage people to go there, and you can just type in your water usage that you have, and it will tell you based on the proposed rates what your new water bill will look like.
And then just to pick on single-family residential, do we have a lot of customers that are over 16 HCFs a month?
It's been a while since I've looked at that. It is not as significant. I think we brought that data in before, showing our tier 3 customers, and our tier 3 usage now is pretty small.
Okay. And then I know you're probably at the mercy of somebody else on this question too, but I keep seeing advertisements touting a revision of the city's online water billing system, which is, difficult and confusing at times to use. I use that every month for years, and I'm just wondering what you know about when that's going to go into effect and look better.
Do you have any updates? I know you meet with that
the city's doing some type of migration where it will look more like the city's website and be easier to use and a different vendor, and that's all I know.
That work is underway. I don't have a date. Actually, I have a meeting today about those updates, but I would say coming soon, hopefully this summer, that they're working on. There's a lot of work, back end work that has to be done to make the migration and make it happen. But I would anticipate this summer.
Okay.
One of the things that we are looking to implement this next fiscal year is the ability to pay with credit cards, pay your water bill with a credit card. And at this time, the city, in order to encourage it, is going to be picking up the transaction fee from Visa and MasterCard to make that happen. So we've included that in our budget this year, but we'll see how popular that takes off. Mm-hmm. If there's no further questions. Yeah. Chair, is there a recommendation?
I'll move recommendation.
We have a motion
I'll second it.
and a second to forward this information to the city council. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Carried unanimously. That ends item 6C
And D.
and D, right. I see what you mean.
Nope.
It was, no, D, I have an old agenda, the one that was in my mailed packet. Right, so we'll go to 6D. Ms. Arroyo, thank you.
Thank you, and good morning. Lisa Arroyo, Wastewater System Manager. I'm here to talk about the fiscal year 17 wastewater rates and fees. I was here in February, and we talked a lot about the same things I'm going to be talking about today. I covered rates and revenues, the 10-year plan, the model that we have for our financial planning, and some rate structures, and I introduced a concept of changing the rate structure. So I'll be recapping a lot of that, as well as talking about our proposed and recommendation for fiscal year 17 fees for wastewater. I showed this to you back in February, something very similar. If you take a look at the table, you'll have the fiscal years through 17 through 22. We have our 10-year plan, and that was done back in 2014. The 10-year plan said that we'd be looking at about a 5% increase over the next several years through 2023. This year, we're proposing a 5.5% across the board increase for services for wastewater fees. And the general reason for that additional 0.5% increase is to account for the conservation efforts additional capital improvement funding, and also so that we can maintain reserves. And I'm going to talk about each one of those as we get through the presentation today. Again, this was something that I showed you back in February. It talks a little bit about our sewer service charges. As you can see from the pie chart, about 97% of our total revenues come in from sewer service charges, and those are for your commercial, your industrial, and your residential monthly fees. About 85% of that 97 is going to be from our residential customers. And if you look at the two big slices of the pie, the blue is our residential fixed component of our wastewater fees, and the green is our volumetric. So we have about 39% of our fees that come in are based on water consumption. With the conservation efforts that we've been seeing in our community, this has dropped our revenue in past years because we depend on that 40% revenue coming in. However, again, as I showed you back in February, our fixed costs are somewhere around 87%. So regardless of really how much water we come in and treat, a large portion of our costs are going to be fixed. They are employees and staffing. That's a very large component of our fixed costs, our vehicles, our equipment. All of that are good examples of our fixed costs. Our variable costs are going to be down around 13%. Those are things like electrical and power, your chemical usage. Those are all going to vary from month to month and year to year. So from these past two slides, it's hopefully a little bit intuitive as to why conservation has played a role in our revenues and in our decreasing revenues. We're seeing less and less from the volumetric fees that are coming in, and our fixed costs are remaining the same. I'm going to talk a little bit about our capital expenses. We have an enormous capital program over the next several years. We're expecting to spend about $95 million through 2023. We have three different, I'll call them budgetary areas in our wastewater system. We have the collection system, the lift stations, and El Estero. We have two components to our capital. If you look at the table right there, the green along the bottom, that's what you call pay-as-you-go. That is our standard, somewhere about $4.2, $4.5 million each year that we pay as you go capital. And that's been paying for a lot of our capital for many years. We also have SRF funding, State Revolving Fund Loan, and that's the blue that you'll see there. Those are our expected expenditures over the next several years. We have two very large projects, the Secondary Process Improvements Project, which is just now starting into construction, and then we also have our Biosolids Project, which we will be going through the design process and constructing in the very near future. When we did our 10-year financial plan back in 2013, both of those, and the 10-year plan was based on the best information we had at that time, both of those projects were estimated at about $10 million under what we project them to be now. So that's factoring into that extra 0.5%. So the collection system, and here is a great picture of the rehab of our system. We do about $2.2 to $2.4 million worth of work in our collection system each and every year. We do the CCTV and condition assessment of our lines, the repair and rehabilitation. And I'd like to take a moment to say that in the past 4 years, we've done about 21 miles worth of repair and rehabilitation on our system. So we're averaging right now about 5 miles per year, which is about 2% of our system. Chemical root foaming, asset management, and capacity improvements. Now, we haven't done any capacity improvements in our system lately, and I'm pleased to say that we don't have a lot of capacity improvement issues. However, we have one that we are proposing to do this next fiscal year. That right there is a picture of State and roughly Hitchcock. It's been identified as a capacity improvement project that we should be doing. It crosses Arroyo Burro Creek. And as we look to finishing fiscal year 16, our projections are that we're going to end our operating budget year with about $1.2 million in surplus. And we are proposing to use that $1.2 million to fund this capacity improvement project. As we look towards our lift stations, we typically spend about $400,000 or so on our lift stations. We have 7 lift stations in the city, 2 miles of force main. We've been focusing on our force mains right now. Last year we did a second redundant force main at our La Colina lift station. That's going to allow us to condition assess the old force main, which was put back in the 1950s, and at some point rehabilitate it. We are now focused on our Braemar force main replacement. That will be happening, starting construction probably within the next week or so. It's a 3,200 lineal foot force main that goes up Cliff Drive. That'll provide us redundancy and reliability. That force main actually crosses Arroyo Burro Creek, and it's a critical lift station for us. We'll also be doing a pretty hefty lift station rehabilitation project at Braemar. And in the future, we'll be looking at Villa Lucero and its force main in the outer years. At El Estero, we spend about $1.5 million to $2 million in capital improvements each and every year. We have 2 major areas. The strategic plan, it does a lot of our asset management, and this next year we'll be looking at hiring a consultant to do a long-range facility plan. We've got a lot of capital improvement projects on the horizon with, we'll be doing the work with the secondary process improvements project, we'll be doing the biosolids, and we've done some significant work already with our headworks and influent pumps. However, there's a lot more work that we need to be considering as we go, and I'm looking at mostly our pay-as-you-go capital funding, that $1.5 million, $2 million. How should we be spending in that money? Is it sufficient for the work that we still have outstanding at the plant? We've got a lot of electrical work, odor control, a couple of facilities that need to be looked at, our disinfection, our primaries, emergency generation, and our generators, as well as our underground utilities. So what we'll be looking for in that long-range facility plan is to tell us the criticality of making and timeline of making those improvements, as well as some budgetary costs. We'll line that up with our 10-year financial plan, and we'll better be able to confirm or change rates in the future so that we can make all of these improvements before we start seeing system failures. As well as the strategic plan, we also have equipment rehabilitation. We are constantly upgrading our aging equipment. So that's a picture right there where we did a project where we put a new sodium hypochlorite line in, and a lot of pumps that we replaced with this fund. Again, we have the 2 large SRF-funded projects, and how that factors into our overall budget is through our debt service repayment. I showed you this graph back in February as well. The blue lines on the bar, those are our operating fund. The purples, those are our debt service, and then the red is our reserves. So if you take a look at today, what we're paying on debt service, that's that little purple bar in the middle, we're repaying our 2004 bonds and our SRF loans for our FOG and our headworks projects. As we complete our secondary process improvements project, our debt funding is going to go from $1.7 million up to $3.9 million. So a little over $2 million we'll have to start paying beginning in 2019. We're estimating that we'll start paying on biosolids in 2021, and that could get pushed out a little bit. And that'll bring our debt service payment up to $5.8 million. So over the next 5 years, we're going to be looking at an increase in debt service of about $4 million. Similar to Kathy Taylor's presentation on fees, we are going to be doing just one fee change for wastewater. Everything else is going to stay status quo for this year, and that is for the sewer tap rescheduling fee. We have a contractor that comes in and performs all of our sewer taps. He charges us $363 if he has to be rescheduled, and so we are going to be increasing our fee schedule to match what he charges us for full cost recovery. We are not proposing any type of other increases to our fees at this time, but we are going to be revisiting them in 2017, 2018 to ensure that our cost of service is consistent with what we're charging. As I start to wrap up the presentation on fees, I wanted to give you an idea of where we are with respect to our neighboring sanitation districts with respect to single residential family charges. On the left is Goleta Sanitary District. They charge about $35.67 per month for their single family resident charges. The two in the middle, the blue and the green, are City of Santa Barbara. The blue is what we charge this year, and it assumes a moderate user. They'll be charged $45.36 right now, and with a 5.5% increase, you'll go up to about $47.87. The gold bar is Carpinteria, and they are at $51.18. And then the maroon on the end is Montecito San, and they're at $90. I'm not sure. I know they've done some Prop 218 noticing and that they'll be increasing their fees as well. So with the fees, this is what it looks like for our customers. The low water user, low or moderate, someone who would be a 6 HCF user, would be, their bill is going to go up by about $1.87 per month. The higher end user, we cap out at 10 HCF. Their bill is going to go up by about $2.51 per month. As we look to future years and what we'll be looking for in rates, we're going to be finishing our local limits study this year. In 2017, 2018, I'd like to visit the fees and do a fee study. And then in 2018, 2019, I'd like to take a look at the residential rate structure. We talked a little bit about that in February, of how we can start bringing that volumetric component down, bringing the fixed component up so that it more closely aligns with our variable and fixed costs. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? I have a quick one. I didn't see specifically called out where the funding for the reclaimed water plant is. Is that something that's actually in water instead of wastewater?
Chair, that's correct. Funding for all recycled water comes out of the water budget.
Any other questions?
Just
Mr.
on that
Kilborn?
same note, does that include staffing too, or how does that work into things?
That's correct. Water pays for wastewater staff at the plant. Don't remember
I
offhand.
think it's one FTE.
One FT at the plant,
Okay.
and then of course there's distribution staff who are dedicated to recycled water as well.
Anything else? In that case, we would be looking for a recommendation also for this wastewater rates.
So moved.
Motion.
I'll second.
Motion a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Carried unanimously. Thank you. And that brings us to what would be, I don't have a number on it. Item 7 is the Water Resources Manager's report.
Chair, Commissioners, we'll go through some of the information here. I've tried to provide it here on the screen. These tables are super small, and so it doesn't really play out well. But just if there was any questions related to current April numbers, again, this is something we look at every month related to Kachuma and state water imports. And this is the chart that I was speaking about earlier, where we have for the first time, state water coming into the lake that we're not utilizing, and it's going to be stored in the lake. That is a change from what we've seen in the past, and we have to update our table now to kind of reflect that new change.
Will you remind me again about the evaporative losses on state water? Is there a time frame on those?
Yes, water held in the lake for more than 30 days is subject to evaporation. So this water will be subject to, we're anticipating at least 20% evaporation by the time it's used.
But we're building up supply for summertime. Is that kind of
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Just trying to build up that war chest to allow us to meet those peak summer demands.
Okay.
So moving on to the next chart. Let me see if I can get this down. This is just showing the trending 12-month running average water usage. And something we pointed out last time that I think is interesting is that we are quickly approaching, and I expect at the end of the summer we will have achieved a water usage that matches where we were in the 90s when there was an outdoor watering moratorium, a ban on any new development, and I think considerable heightened fear in the community about its water usage, and there was less people. So I think the more people doesn't necessarily mean more water. That's kind of some of the message that comes out of this document. Next slide is our gallons per capita per day, and we have a lot of information on here. Certainly you see our 12-month average, which is 88 gallons per capita. The goal by 2020 is 117, as mentioned earlier, so we are far exceeding that. And then further down in the graphic, you'll notice the residential gallons per capita per day. That's kind of the benchmark used to compare our agency to other agencies, and we're hovering just above 50 gallons per capita today when you look at just our community residential users. I'm not even going to begin to try and talk about this table, but I think we've gotten it updated to show our rainfall for the year, except for the total. And weather, I've kind of given up on weather going forward and not thinking it's going to provide us any benefit here, but they are predicting above average temperatures for the next 3 months, and we'll keep an eye on it. One of the graphics I've been working on with staff is trying to plot the ETO over the last few years, trying to get as much data as I can going back, because as you know, a lot of our irrigation customers, their water budgets are established by the ETO, the evapotranspiration that occurs that month. And so what I'm wanting to kind of, for discussion's sake, just show how warm. We've been talking about how dry it's been, but we haven't been talking about how that dry equates to how the heat index, which is an important one, and I think the evapotranspiration kind of pulls that all together and kind of shows just how much drier and warmer it has been. And then, of course, here's the weather forecasts for the next 3 months. And we're just outside. Doesn't that seem like it's always the case?
If the map is accurate, we are just outside.
I don't know what above average rainfall looks like in the months of May, June, and July. Current water levels in Gibraltar. And then this historic graphic that we bring back, which I think shows us now, and this is kind of that, we've certainly gone past where the miracle month of March happened in 1991, but the question here is the lake hasn't physically dropped below that lowest point. We anticipate that happening in the next month or so, certainly when the downstream users do their 7,000 acre foot release the reservoir is going to plummet below this. But
On the Fayram plot, it looked like maybe a third of the whole capacity
it will be released.
go in one big chunk,
Yeah.
more or less.
But I have an off-topic. Sorry, I was just thinking. It looked like there was no water left in the fish accounts.
That is correct. The water will run out in mid-June, and there will be no water left in that account. The challenge that we're facing, this is the healthy discussion that's going on right now, is the Bureau and the member units would like to see the fish in Hilton Creek relocated to a fish hatchery, obviously isolated from all other fish, but taken to a fish hatchery where we know we can keep them safe until this drought is over. The challenge is we are meeting, NIMS doesn't support that. They want those fish to be maintained in the San Ynez River, and we are worried we can't maintain that, specifically when we run out of water to feed them. And so it's certainly setting us up for an interesting discussion and a very frustrating one. We've spent, obviously, considerable resources to ensure the survival of the species, and it seems that NIMS may be playing this to a point where we have a take, basically the death of some of these steelhead, because they are using this as a move to try and get more water, when it's not that they need more water, it's that they need water at the right times. And so it is a very frustrating discussion that's going on right now, and we have this this committee. It's called the AMC. I forget what the acronym stands for right now, but it is a group made up of folks from NIMS, CCRB, the Bureau, and the member units working towards trying to figure out a solution to preserve the steelhead. I'm not sure if I mentioned this, but the Fish and Game is actually going to be taking the fish out of Jameson, which have historical significance in their genealogy up there, and they're going to be moving those fish into a hatchery to make sure they survive. And so we're watching that and hoping that we might be able to do something similar with the ones in San Ynez. One of the challenges, too, NIMS has been pushing for, okay, if you can't keep them in Hilton Creek because there's no water, then move them down to the pools in the main stem of the San Ynez River, which would be the plunge pool. And the challenge was with that is those are full of predator fish, bass, what else is in there? Carp, all kinds of stuff that we know don't, along with a very low oxygen. Those temperatures in those lower pools are really warm. It would not be a place that we think that the steelhead would be able to thrive in. So, fantastic question. Oops. So moving on, we get to the wastewater. And wastewater flows, looks like hovering around 6 MGD. And it'd be interesting to see if how these bounce back after the drought is over. I am pleased to report the spills. We are at just 3 spills so far, almost halfway through the year. Certainly, as we've learned in the past, they don't come in nice, even increments. So we don't know if that's 3 and 9 to come or 3 and 0 to come. But certainly, I think we have implemented a lot of process to try and reduce that, and hopefully we're seeing some reflection of that. And then on the bottom here, you'll notice that the majority of water currently being put out into the system is recycled water, made up with some water from our Valverde well. So just a update on the WARN Act. We continue to move forward with that. We're working with the Bureau right now, trying to finalize the environmental assessment. I hope that'll be done in the next month or so, but nothing moves quickly. That's the only thing that is certain. And we also hope to finish up our CEQA analysis. It's now in our hands of our city attorney to finish his final review. And then I also wanted to make the commission aware of a contract that went to council for design of our water main for the next year. It was a $600,000 on-call contract. Right now we are down a project engineer in water, and given all the other projects we have, we just don't have the resources to dedicate to this internally, and so we'll be contracting with the local firm, Stantec, formerly Penfield and Smith, to provide us those design services. And then I also wanted to mention that the annual collection system report will be going to council on Tuesday. Given the agenda we had today, I pushed it to June. There isn't any action to take on it, but I want to make sure that the commission is keyed into everything that is going on with that. And then 2 more items. I will be out for the June meeting, and Kathy Taylor will be filling in. I'll be on vacation. And I wanted to plant the seed to get the Water Commission thinking about potentially canceling August's Water Commission meeting. That has traditionally been done. Council usually takes about 3 weeks off in August. So if we don't have any critical items, certainly if we have something pressing, say we need to move up the conservation efforts, then certainly we will keep that meeting, but just wanting to kind of plant that seed that if we don't have critical items that we need to discuss, potentially canceling that meeting. And that completes my presentation.
Oh, just FYI, I'll probably be out of town on business for the next Water Commission meeting in June, so I won't be present.
I will be out of town also, so we're looking at 3 commissioners. That would be a quorum anyway, so it is the 16th, if I'm reading correctly. Yeah.
I have knee surgery on the 15th.
Oh, you're not going to be here.
Well, I mean, if it's outpatient and if I feel wonderful, but I'm not leaning towards being here the day after it. So if you want to reschedule to the next week, I'm okay with that. Or something else.
Well, that's a twist. Yes.
How about possibly canceling the... Oh, no. August was the one you were going to cancel?
Canceling June instead of August?
I don't know if that helps us, but just a thought.
Well, it sounds like we may physically not have a quorum, which sort of cancels it by itself.
Well, I will continue to talk with Chair, but it sounds like the meeting for June, unless something changes, it needs to be canceled and rescheduled, or scheduled or canceled. And I'll talk with the Chair, and we'll get something out in the next week or 2 on that. How's that sound?
Okay, we'll leave that one pending.
Yes.
Thank you. With that, we'll adjourn the meeting of the Board of Water Commissioners. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.